Mr. President, my distinguished and respected colleagues, Senator Bassey Akpan, Akwa Ibom North East. Mr. President, this bill is co-sponsored by all members of the Senate committees on gas, downstream, and upstream. Mr. President, my distinguished and respected colleagues, it is my honor and privilege to lead this debate on the Nigerian Petroleum Industry Administration Bill 2017. This bill was read for the first time in this chamber on the 25th day of July 2017. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, the Nigerian Petroleum Industry Administration Bill 2017 seeks to provide for a new legal framework for the administration of the upstream, downstream, midstream sectors of the Nigerian petroleum industry. It seeks to provide effective administration of the entire industry and to open up the industry for investment and growth. Therefore, this law has the capacity to create the much desired expansion of the industry by unleashing an inflow of new entrants into the petroleum operations, which will be accompanied by substantial new investments and overall transformation of Nigerian oil and gas industry. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, permit me to briefly provide the background and necessary insight into the bill to enable you to understand our cogent request for the second reading of this bill. We are all aware that the basic legal framework for the administration of our petroleum industry is the Petroleum Act Cap 350 of 1990 as amended, which came into force on the 27th day of November 1969, along with its several tributary regulations made at the behest and in pursuance of the Petroleum Act. This act was enacted during the infancy of the Nigerian petroleum industry, and its main objective was to provide for the regulation and administration of an infantile industry. Over time, the petroleum industry has evolved in several dimensions, including new discoveries of commercial hydrocarbons around the world, scope of operations, push from the competing energy sources, the environment, and the role of gas resources, cost structure, know-how, technology, people, geopolitics, volatility of prices and markets. These forces render the Petroleum Act ineffective and inefficient for the administration of the Nigerian petroleum industry. The Act has become outdated and inadequate for the administration of the Nigerian petroleum industry. In fact, it has become a hindrance in the process of contemporary petroleum management. The problems created by the extant petroleum administration regime can be summarized as follows: an outdated industry legal framework comprising laws and subsidiary legislation dating back to the 1960s, inefficient and poorly segmented regulatory entities, and inefficiently structured commercial entities, lack of clarity, transparency, and accountability, ineffective upstream and create management system, a poorly regulated downstream sector based on regulated product prices regime, an outdated fiscal regime, an absence of a legal framework for petroleum producing host community development. The objective of this bill. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, let me enunciate the major reasons why we need to quickly enact the Nigerian Petroleum Industry Administration Bill 2017. To create a robust legal framework for the administration of upstream licenses and leases, provide regulations for the organization of midstream operations and gas markets, set out the procedures for administration of licensing and operations of the downstream sector of the petroleum oil and gas industry. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, as we are all aware, this distinguished and committed Senate has already dealt with the issues of inefficient and poorly segmented regulatory entities and reformed the extant poorly structured commercial entity when it graciously passed the PIGB. The legal framework for a new fiscal regime and the petroleum producing host communities development has also been read and has failed second reading. Mr. President, our distinguished colleagues, a bill to take care of our ineffectual and outmoded legal framework for upstream, midstream, downstream administration. The Nigerian Petroleum Industry Administration Bill 2017 will therefore address the following problems of the upstream, midstream, and downstream sector of Nigerian oil and gas industry. 1. The extant inadequate license and lease administration. The current absence of clear statutory regulations for administration of midstream petroleum activities and the present poorly structured downstream administration system based on regulations of petroleum product prices. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, the reform of the administration of the upstream sector by providing for an appropriate and transparent management system for licenses and leases, awards, assignment, acquisition, and relinquishment of renewals, clear rules for domestic gas supply obligations, environmental quality management, abandonment and decommissioning, as well as health, safety, and environment and prohibition of gas flaring. It will also provide support for the growth of indigenous companies. This bill will also ensure an effective administration of the midstream products and gas regulation by creating an effective licensing regime for a midstream licensing regime, domestic gas aggregation rules, wholesale gas market rules, as well as the third-party access rules, the gas network codes, the gas pricing regime, and competition and market regulation, as well as consumer protection rules. This bill will also establish an administrative framework for the downstream licensing regime, provide incentives for local refining of crude oil, create rules for bulk storage of crude oil, petrol products, transportation pipelines, and permit an agreement for the retail of petroleum products, operation of petrochemical facilities. It will also provide for competition and market regulation, pricing regime, and consumer protection. This bill has gone through the first reading, is a part of the legislative reform of the Nigerian oil and gas industry championed by the 8th Senate and the National Assembly. The bill is an exclusive legislative proposal providing for the administration of upstream, midstream, downstream of Nigerian petroleum industry, and is presented in line with the perspective of the 8th Senate to split the PIB into smaller logical parts to allow for easier consideration passage and when necessary future amendments. The structure and content of Nigerian Petroleum Industry Administration Bill 2017. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the structure of the bill is as follows. Upstream petroleum administration, midstream, downstream, interpretation, short title, consequential amendment, and transitional savings provision schedule. Contents of the bill. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, the bill is divided into 6 parts as follows. Part 1 provides for a new legal framework for upstream petroleum administration, comprising of a new grid system, appropriate sizes, prospecting and mining licenses, etc. Part 2 provides for the midstream operations and gas regulations. Part 3 provides for downstream licensing regime. And Part 4, 5, and 6 contains, respectively, the interpretations, short titles, repeals, consequential amendment, and transitional and saving provisions. These parts are followed by different schedules. There is no financial implication to this bill, Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, let me conclude by stating that this bill, the Nigerian Petroleum Industry Administration Bill 2017, proposes an effective and robust legal framework for the administration of the upstream, midstream, and downstream sector of Nigerian petroleum industry. The framework proposed in this bill takes into account the aspirations of government and several industry stakeholders, while also navigating away from the shortcomings of the extant legal regime. We can confidently state that this framework has the potential to provide for effective administration of the upstream, midstream, and downstream sectors of the petroleum industry. I hereby solicit the support of Mr. President and my colleagues that this bill be now be read the second time. I so submit, Mr. President.